This video will show you how to use the CALC option. Specifically, the first option in the Calculate menu is Value. Once you have inputted the function into the calculator, the Value option allows you to input a value for x and it will calculate the corresponding value for y. The CALC Value option is good if you are only looking for a couple of values. Otherwise, using the table is more efficient. For the first example, let's input the function f of x equals the square root of the quantity 2x minus 5, subtract 4. And then we would like to evaluate f of 6. That is, what is the y value when x is equal to 6? So we will input this function, y equals the square root, so second function, square root of 2x subtract 5, close the radicand, subtract 4, okay, and we can go ahead and go to second function and then calc, and calc is right here, so we need to hit the trace button. Okay, so here's the calculate menu, and then the first option is value, and that's what we want. We want the value. So we select enter. So what it does is it graphs the function on the screen, and it's asking you to input a value of x. So we're interested in finding f of 6, so we need to input 6. So if we input 6 and then select enter, it gives us the value for the function at 6. So you can see at x equals 6, y is equal to negative 1.354, and there's the cursor at 6, negative 1.354, and it's showing you that you're evaluating this particular function right here. Alright? Now I would like to show you a shortcut for evaluating a function at a particular value. So we're going to use the same function, y equals the square root of the quantity 2x minus 5, then subtract 4. As we did before, we're going to evaluate the function at x equals 6. So let's just go back to this function, and it's already been inputted. So let's go ahead and hit graph, and there's the function. Okay, now all you need to do is select the trace key. So if you hit trace and then 6 and then select enter. So there it gives you at x equals 6, y equals negative 1.354, and so on. Now if you use the arrow keys, it resorts back to the general trace mode, where you can see I'm moving along the curve with the cursor and it's changing the coordinates for x and y. Now if I wanted to evaluate this function at x equals 8, then we would select trace and then 8 and select enter. And there's the function evaluated at 8. So at x equals 8, y is equal to negative 0.6833752. Alright, so this is just an easier way to evaluate a function at a particular value rather than using the calc key. So if we use the calc key, remember we'd have to go second function, calc, and then we would go to value, select enter, and then we choose the value for x. So right now we just chose 8 and select enter, and then here's the value. So it's a little bit less keystrokes. Now I'd like to show you something that happens when we try to input a value for x that is not shown in this viewing window. And right now we're graphing this in the standard viewing window. So let's say we want to find what happens when x is equal to 20. That's somewhere way out here, right? So let's go to second function and then calc, and then we want the value, so we select enter, and let's input 20. Now remember, this is the standard viewing window, so it only goes out to 10. Alright, so we hit enter, and then what it gives us is an error. It's an invalid dimension is what's happening. So we need to quit out of this, and what we need to do is we change the window. So if we change the window by selecting window, and let's take X max out to, let's say, 25. That will be fine. And select enter. And now we can go to second function, calc. And now let's do the value. Okay, so you can see that we went further out on the x-axis. And now we can input 20, and it's going to give us the corresponding value. So when x is equal to 20, y is equal to 1.916, and there's the cursor at that particular coordinate, and it's evaluating this function. Now let's see what happens if we try to input a value of x that's not in the domain. So remember, the domain is all values of x that makes the function defined. So you can see approximately right here, alright, is where the domain starts, and it goes all the way to infinity. Alright, so if I try to input a value for x like 0, let's see what happens. So I'm going to go to second function and calc, and then we select 1 for the value, so we hit enter, and we're going to input 0. And 0 is not in the domain, but let's see what happens. If we select enter, it doesn't give us any value back for y. Okay, so when it doesn't give you a value back for y, there's a problem. So if we go second calc, let's input negative 10, select enter, let's hit negative 10, and enter. See, it doesn't give us a value of y back. So negative 10 is all the way over here, and you can see that negative 10 is not in the domain. Now let's look at one more thing. Remember that we had the table option that we can input values. So if we go to second function and table, and let's go ahead and delete these values out of here. So if we go ahead and input 0 like we did, what it shows is it just shows an error. Okay, and the reason why it says error is because it's not in the domain. So like negative 10, which we just did, and enter, it gives us an error. Okay, so I just wanted to show you. And remember that I mentioned earlier that if you're going to input more than a couple of values, it's more efficient to use the table option. Alright, so let's go to example number 2. Let's first quit out of this, and we will go back in and clear the function. Now, this time we're going to input two functions for example number 2, and that's going to be negative 2x plus 1, and then we'll go down to the next function, and let's input a fourth degree polynomial, and that's x to the fourth, subtract 4x cubed, plus 2x squared, minus x plus 5. And let's go back to the zoom and standard mode. So we want number 6, zoom standard. Okay, there's our two functions. And we would like to evaluate f of negative 4, g of negative 4, f of 12, and g of 12. So if we go to second function in calc, and we want the value, so select enter, and let's put in negative 4. Okay, so at x equals negative 4, y is 9, and that's for the function y1, which is negative 2x plus 1. You can't really see the 1 well there, but it's negative 2x plus 1. If you needed to check that, you just hit the y equal button and you can verify it. Let's go back to second function in calc, and we want the value. So remember, we wanted negative 4. Select enter. Okay, so that is the ordered pair right here for this particular function, negative 4 and 9. Now we want the second function to also be evaluated at x equal negative 4. So what we do is we select the arrow up or arrow down, and you can see that it changes to y2 now. So when x equals -4, y is 553. And if I select back up, you see it changes back to the first function, and I go back down and it changes to the second function. Alright, so that's how you go between each function and get their values. So now let's evaluate f of 12. So let's go to second function in CALC and select enter for the value, and now we want 12. And let's go ahead and select enter. Now it gives us invalid. And remember, the reason why it did this is because we were viewing this graph in the standard viewing window, and it only goes from -10 to 10. So we were asking it to find a value at x equals 12, so we need to change the window. So let's quit out of this by hitting number 1. We could go to 2, select number 2, and that just takes you back to the screen. Alright, so let's go to the window, move it out to 20. That should be fine. Select enter, and now we go ahead and go to CALC, and we want the value, and now let's input the value of 12 for x. Okay, so select 12 and hit enter. So for y1, when x is 12, y is -23, and let's move the arrow up, and it changes the function to y2, and so when x is 12, y is equal to 14,105. So this concludes the video on using the CALC value option